What do you do when your D&D campaign isn't just bad but a literal floating prison? When your characters are shackled by magical contracts, surrounded by godlike NPCs who treat you like garbage, and the DM sends his own god to drag you back if you try to leave? This is the story of how one player developed a pathological fear of airships. And honestly, you will too. Part 1. It started the way so many horror stories do. A group of friends, mostly new to D&D, with a DM who claimed to be experienced. They were playing 3.5 edition Eberron with literally every expansion and addition allowed. The DM was actually disappointed when his brand new group of players all chose to play simple archetypes, instead of somehow magically knowing how to build exploitative, game-breaking combos by combining multiple sourcebooks that were never meant to be compatible. Now, for anyone unfamiliar with 3.5 Eberron, this is a system with decades worth of supplements. Expecting first-time players to min-max across all of them is like handing someone the keys to a space shuttle and being annoyed they don't know how to dock with the International Space Station. But that should have been the first red flag. It wasn't. The party consisted of a changeling sorcerer posing as an elf, a fighter, a rogue, a bard, and a ranger. The changeling sorcerer and the fighter had an existing backstory together, playing as something like brother and sister. Both the rogue player and the sorcerer player were women. Everyone else, including the DM, was male. This will become very relevant later. There was no session 0. The first session was literally you all meet at a tavern to sign up for the same job. No motivations, no plot hooks, no world building, nothing. The sorcerer player had to miss that first session due to work. When she asked how it went, she got mixed reports. The ranger had shown up drunk, spent most of the session being incoherent, and at one point insisted he could use his swim skill to dance on a tavern floor. Not exactly the grand adventure she'd been hoping for. But hey, a sillier tone could still be fun. Right. The second session is where the nightmare truly began. The party went to meet their employer, who owned an airship. This airship would become the single worst location in the history of their tabletop experience. It was magically enhanced to be impenetrable to basically everything, and it was filled to the brim with level 20 NPCs of unusual races and classes, all exploiting every weird nuance of 3.5 to maximize their power. It was a literal boat full of DM NPCs, right down to his favorite self-insert character. And this wasn't a secret. The DM would gleefully brag about his overpowered class combo builds, explaining in detail how each one was unbeatable. Meanwhile, the party, level 1. Think about that for a moment. A ship full of level 20 characters, and they're hiring a group of level 1s. That's like a team of Navy SEALs hiring a group of kindergartners to defuse a bomb. There is no scenario where this makes sense unless the DM just wanted an audience to watch his characters be amazing. And spoiler, that's exactly what he wanted. Immediately, the sorcerer player saw the problem. Why are level 1 adventurers being hired by what are essentially gods? Why would these all-powerful beings need a bunch of nobodies? But the DM insisted he had a plan. So she swallowed her objections and hoped for the best. That became a bad habit. The DM then declared that multiple characters on the ship were reading the party's minds. No saving throws allowed. Quote, too powerful. When the sorcerer objected, pointing out that her character had things she wanted to keep private, she was told, too bad. There was nothing she could do about it. Then came the contracts. Every party member was forced to sign binding magical contracts that would instantly kill them if they ever tried to leave the airship without permission or told anyone about their employment. When the sorcerer objected, she was told the fighter had already signed on her behalf. She was already employed. Shut up and stop asking questions. When the rogue hesitated, the DM just rushed past it. You all signed. Moving on. So let's take stock. Session 2 and the party has already lost their bodily autonomy, their mental privacy, and their freedom of movement. They're bound by death contracts on a ship full of gods who can read their every thought, surrounded by characters who are impossibly more powerful than them with no way out. This isn't a campaign. This is a hostage situation with dice. Their first mission was a dungeon crawl. A simple fetch quest. Go to a house, pick something up, expect some trouble. Easy enough for a level 1 party, right? Wrong. The dungeon was built exactly like the DMU's NPCs, exploiting obscure 3.5 mechanics that none of the players had ever heard of. It was filled with overpowered monsters that could practically one-shot their squishy level 1 characters. And right when they were about to TPK, one of the ship's level 20 NPCs burst through the ceiling and slaughtered everything in a single turn. Surely this was just an introductory session. Surely the next one would be better. It was not. For the next few sessions, the pattern repeated like clockwork. The DM would throw the party at challenges wildly beyond their level. They would get destroyed. And then, at the last possible second, his godlike NPCs would swoop in and save them. Every single time. This is what I call spectator D&D. The players aren't heroes. They're not even sidekicks. They're the studio audience watching the DM's fanfiction play out in real time, except they don't even get comfortable seats. They get near-death experiences and the privilege of saying thank you afterward. The sorcerer, the rogue, and the bard all began playing their characters as frustrated and reluctant, digging in their heels about going on missions they were clearly unqualified for. Only the fighter, being a sweetheart who didn't want to cause waves, played along, though even he was worried about his sister's safety. This upset the DM because apparently they were supposed to be delighted at how cool and brave his amazing NPCs were. They were supposed to be grateful for being rescued over and over again. When they tried to explain multiple times that they weren't having fun, it was like talking to a wall. He would nod, say he understood completely, and then do the exact same thing the very next session. Eventually he got dismissive and even hostile about them bringing up what he called the not having fun problem. The ranger quit, citing work obligations. Smart guy. Part 2. Why didn't the rest of them quit? 3 reasons. First, they were all friends outside the game and didn't want bridges burned. Second, the DM was young, only 20, and had mental health problems they were trying to be sensitive about. And third, they genuinely loved their characters and desperately wanted the game to be good. This is one of the most common traps in tabletop horror stories. Players endure terrible games because they love their characters too much to abandon them. They confuse leaving a bad game with giving up on something they've invested in. But here's the thing, your characters don't exist without you. You can always take them to a better table. Eventually, the rogue player put her foot down. She said she didn't want to be a damsel in distress anymore. She wanted a real adventure with real challenges they could actually overcome. And because the DM had a secret, unsettled crush on her, suddenly he took it very seriously. Oh no, he had no idea. He would fix that right away. The next session started the same way, trapped on the airship, surrounded by gods who treated them like servants, being told about yet another mission. And then, suddenly, they were attacked. Something impossibly powerful breached the ship's defenses. A single man slaughtered nearly every NPC on board. He taunted the party, told them they were too weak to even bother killing, stole a world-ending MacGuffin from the ship and vanished. He left behind a ship full of corpses, one surviving NPC, and a party of low-level adventurers standing in the wreckage. And for one shining moment, the sorcerer player's mind was spinning with possibilities. They were the only people alive who knew about this threat. They could go on a quest to find a way to stop the villain. The bard had a family of information gatherers, so maybe they could start there. For the first time in the entire campaign, they had stakes. They had agency. The shackles were finally off. And then the DM described the rogue's character suddenly awakening to a mysterious power. He narrated her feeling an overwhelming urge to touch the dead NPCs with her glowing hands. When the rogue player didn't do it fast enough for his liking, he took control of her character entirely. He narrated her touching every single corpse. Every NPC healed. Every NPC came back to life. Every single one. I want you to imagine this from the player's perspective. For an entire campaign, they've been powerless, trapped, and then for one brief, beautiful moment, the chains break. They can see the adventure they always wanted right in front of them, and the DM reaches in and puts the chains right back on. He didn't just take away their freedom, he dangled it in front of them first. The sorcerer declared that this was way above her pay grade and demanded to be fired. End of session. Before the next game, the DM sent the sorcerer player a whiny message complaining that her character wanting to quit was messing up his plans. She told him bluntly, the only thing keeping her character there was her fighter friend, and watching an entire ship of supposedly invincible NPCs get massacred in front of her had completely overridden that. Her character didn't trust these people. It was on the DM to create reasons for her to stay. And no, threatening her was not a good reason. The DM's solution. The captain gave a big speech explaining that they had deliberately let the villain kill them as part of a master plan. They secretly knew the rogue had revival powers all along. They had everything under control. So not only were the NPCs unable to protect the party, they were also complete morons who got themselves killed on purpose. Brilliant. What had initially seemed like a hub world between missions quickly became a literal prison. When characters protested a mission or questioned an NPC, the DM would smugly remind them that they were thousands of feet in the air. If they didn't like it, they could jump. The party had no privacy. Their rooms had no locks. Mind readers surveilled every thought, and anything a player mentioned their character thinking about was fair game for the NPCs to pick up on and yell at them about. When the bard tried to use a spell to block his door, an NPC smashed through the wall just to make a point. When the sorcerer wanted a spell to create a private pocket dimension, the DM rejected it because pocket dimensions can't tether to relative objects. Except that the airship already had pocket dimensions tethered to it. Rules for thee but not for me. 3/4 of the party relied on magic. The ship had built-in anti-magic fields. The NPCs would regularly force the party into a room, activate the anti-magic so they couldn't escape, and then spend the time berating them for being disrespectful, lazy, selfish, and ungrateful. Read that again. They would lock the players in a room, strip them of their abilities, and then lecture them about their attitude. This isn't D&D, this is a power fantasy about control. The airship isn't a setting. It's a metaphor for everything wrong with this D-Muz approach to the game. They had no say in where the ship went. The bard desperately wanted to visit his family city to use his information-gathering background, but the DM didn't want him using that background to actually gather information, so the ship was always conveniently anywhere but there. Then came the changeling reveal. The sorcerer had been hiding her true nature as a changeling for the entire campaign, carefully building toward a dramatic reveal. The DM, upset that she kept questioning his NPCs, outed her to the entire party through his self-insert character, who was also a changeling. A character moment she had been planning for months was stolen from her as punishment for not blindly obeying the plot. The group managed to salvage some interesting roleplay from the fallout, but the sorcerer player was furious. The DM later insisted his perfect NPC was doing the sorcerer a favor by exposing her secrets. From that point on, the sorcerer was openly hostile to the self-insert, and the DM was perpetually, genuinely shocked that she despised him for it. Part 3. As the party refused to cooperate in character, the DM was forced to justify why this weak, low-level group was doing jobs that any one of his level 20 NPCs could handle in an hour. And so began what the players came to call the justification game. Why can't the NPCs do the missions themselves? Well, if the NPCs ever leave the ship, they get instantly attacked by horrifying monsters. But what about all those times they left the ship to bail us out? Ignore those don't count. Why is it our problem they lost their MacGuffin? Because you should want to save the world. Fine, we want to leave, you can't. A cult will murder you because of the rogue's revival powers, but we leave the ship for missions all the time. Oh, the cult only murders you when the NPCs don't want you to leave. You can hear the logic bending and breaking, can't you? Every excuse contradicted the last one. Every justification opened up a new hole in the story. But admitting the setup was broken would mean admitting that his precious NPCs were the problem, and that was never going to happen. The rogue wanted to become a lycanthrope. In 3.5, this apparently boosted her by 10 levels overnight. Instead of worrying about balance, the DM gifted it to her immediately. Because of his crush. The rogue player didn't know about the crush at the time and was deeply uncomfortable when it eventually came out. She was in love with someone else entirely and had been completely oblivious to the nice guy act. So now the party was weaker than the ship NPCs and weaker than their own teammate. All because the DM thought special treatment at the table would translate into something off the table. The encounters remained overpowered and generic. Square room, X number of enemies, fight. Social encounters were just as bad. NPCs would either completely stonewall them or be petty, sarcastic, and mean. And when the DM got angry at a specific player, every single NPC on the ship would simultaneously become hostile to that player's character, as if they all shared one mind, which, given the D-Muz style, they basically did. The sorcerer took the brunt of this. Her character was mocked for being angry about having her changeling identity stolen. She was ridiculed for being frightened after nearly dying on a mission. Her feelings were only considered valid when another party member backed her up. The one bright spot was the party's relationships with each other, the brother-sister dynamic between the sorcerer and the fighter, the sorcerer's growing friendship with the rogue, her playful rivalry with the bard. These moments were the only reason anyone still showed up. But the DM couldn't leave them alone. Every private conversation was invaded by an NPC, every in-joke was co-opted. Once, during a heartfelt scene between the sorcerer and the rogue, the D-Muz self-insert literally barged in, told the rogue not to be afraid, declared they were all family now, and gave her a ring of invisibility. The sorcerer was completely shoved out of the scene. When the player pointed out she was still there, She got a half-hearted, "Oh yeah, you too, I guess." When the bard died in combat, the rogue's revival power suddenly didn't work. Instead, they had to hand over all their money for a resurrection scroll. The DM later bragged that this was his clever solution to the party having too much gold. He was the one who had set their salary in the first place. So the power that was forced on the rogue without her consent, by taking over her character, now conveniently stops working the one time it would actually benefit the party. This DM didn't give the rogue that ability because it made for a good story. He gave it to her so his NPCs could live, and the moment it served the players instead of him, he took it away. Then the creepy stuff escalated. He pressured the sorcerer player to have her character use shape-shifting for sexual purposes, calling her prudish for refusing. He pushed for party members to fall in love and have babies. He tried to implant false memories in the bard's mind to force a romance with the rogue. He demanded that another character seduce more. He described the ship NPCs having regular orgies. When the entire party recoiled, they were called prudes. Eventually, the whole party complained about the power imbalance. The DM took a 3-week sulk break, then returned with a sudden time skip. Everyone jumped from level 4 to 12. They had apparently all accepted apprenticeships under the ship NPCs they hated. No player input required. Did higher levels help? No. The first post-skip encounter was specifically designed to neutralize the rogue's abilities. An underground room with absolutely no shadows, against a wizard with 10 times normal hit points. The rogue's build relied entirely on shadows for her sneak attack. She had been so excited to finally feel powerful. Instead, they got trounced, and yet another NPC had to step in. This is such a telling moment. The one player the DM supposedly liked, the one he was trying to impress, finally gets a chance to shine. And he builds an encounter specifically designed to shut her down, because even his crush on her was less important than making sure nobody, absolutely nobody, was ever more impressive than his precious NPCs. Fighter player had asked for one small thing. His character had a backstory as a wandering warrior, and all he wanted was for the occasional NPC to recognize him. A rumor here, a grateful villager there. The DM agreed and then never followed through. Not once. All of the warforged on the ship were cooler and stronger than him. Nobody gave him the time of day because he was the quote dumb fighter. This broke the player's heart. He was the one who had tried the hardest to make the game work. He suspended his disbelief until it hurt. He went along with every mission, encouraged the other characters when they wanted to refuse, and the DM couldn't be bothered to give him one small thing in return. Near the end, the sorcerer made a break for it. She left the airship and was not coming back. The DM's response: he literally had the god of her faith descend from the celestial plane to order her back to the ship. Obey the NPCs, follow orders like a good little servant, or be cursed. This god was supposed to be a trickster deity who favored chaos and shaking up the natural order. The sorcerer player told the DM her character believed she had encountered an imposter. He got offended and whined that she needed to just go back to the ship already. A trickster god whose divine commandment is obey authority and stay in line. The DM didn't even bother to make the law consistent with his own world. He just needed a cosmic leash, and he grabbed the nearest god-shaped object to use as one. The sorcerer player had tried everything over the course of a year. She sent the DM resources on how to improve. She wrote detailed feedback on unsatisfying scenes. She called out the creepy behavior toward the rogue player in-game and out. Every time he pretended to listen and then changed absolutely nothing. The players weren't complicated. They wanted to go on adventures and face challenges they could overcome without being rescued by NPCs. But the DM didn't want to run a game. He wanted a captive audience for his amazing original characters and their story. The party wasn't a group of heroes. They were extras in a show that was never about them. This went on for a full year. 12 months of magical imprisonment, both in-game and out. The DM was heavily embedded in their social circles. He was known for tantrums. Everyone was afraid that quitting would burn bridges and cause a social apocalypse. And nobody was communicating with each other about how miserable they were, so every player assumed they were the only one who wanted to leave. This is the geek social fallacy at its most destructive. The belief that ending a bad game makes you the bad guy, that tolerating someone's terrible behavior is the price of friendship. It kept 4 people trapped for an entire year in a game that made them actively unhappy. And the worst part, they all wanted to leave, every single one of them. They just didn't know the others felt the same way. Then one night at a party, someone casually mentioned the game, said the DM had been bragging about how well it was going and how much fun everyone was having. The sorcerer player snapped. Fueled by alcohol and a year of suppressed frustration, She unloaded everything on a completely unrelated friend. She ranted for half an hour straight, pouring out every grievance, every humiliation, every moment she had swallowed her pride and hoped things would get better. The poor friend handled it like an absolute champ. By the time she was done, she knew it was over. No D&D is better than bad D&D. She told the other players her intentions. And that's when they discovered the truth. Every single one of them had felt the exact same way the entire time, but had been too polite to say anything. Together, unanimously, they agreed it was done. They spent 3 days carefully crafting a message to the DM that was kind, firm, and designed to minimize the chances of a nuclear meltdown. He took it with relative grace. At first. Later he got drunk and went on rants about how they were all terrible players who hated fun. He bragged about running 5 games now and smugly asked the fighter how many games he was playing. The answer, of course, was none. The DM expected them to come crawling back, begging for another chance at his masterpiece. Outro. But here's the thing about rock bottom. Sometimes it's exactly where you need to be to find something better. That friend the sorcerer player had drunk ranted at for half an hour. Turns out, he was a DM and he had been thinking about starting a story-heavy campaign. He just needed players. And wouldn't you know it, 4 players had just become available. They've been playing in his campaign for over a year now. The combat is hard but fair. The NPCs are interesting and varied. The world feels alive and responsive. And most importantly, there are no airships. If you're trapped in a game that feels more like a prison than an adventure, know this. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to want better. And sometimes the best campaign of your life is waiting on the other side of the worst one.